Migrants convicted of sexual offences will be unable to claim asylum in the UK under a change in the law aimed at tightening border security. It's an amendment being made to the Border Security, Asylum and Immigration Bill, which is making its way through Parliament now. The Home Secretary Yvette Cooper joins us. Very good morning to you.
Good morning, Susanna.
Many people going to say, hang on, how come this isn't already part of our law? How could we possibly be granting asylum to people who have been convicted of sex offences, child sex offences? Feels abhorrent.
I agree. I completely agree, and that's why we're changing the law. So you recall over a year ago, the appalling case of Abdullah Zedi, who had attacked a woman and two children in Clapham with acid. It turned out he had been granted asylum in 2020, even despite the fact that he was put onto the sex offenders register for 10 years as a result of crimes that he had committed. Frankly, when I saw the details of that case, I was totally appalled. I think it was a disgrace that he was granted asylum. But that was what the law that we inherited said should happen. But that's why we've been working on this, to make sure we have a way to strengthen the law, and that is the new amendment to the Borders Bill that we are bringing forward and announcing today.
OK, however, that could be trumped by appeals to the European Convention on Human Rights, because foreign sex offenders will still be able to appeal their asylum rejection or their deportation under the ECHR. How are you going to tackle that without, as perhaps reform would suggest, leaving the ECHR?
Well, there's a couple of points there. The first thing is, the first step is to make sure that people cannot be granted asylum, because if you're granted asylum or refugee status, that brings with it additional protections, means that you can work, means that you can stay in the country for 5 years, means that in future you could potentially get settlement and even further down the track can get citizenship as a result. So it's really important, and that's what this law change does, to prevent people in this situation, sex offenders, from being granted asylum in the first place. And that we can do as part of changing the law. You're right that there can be challenges to deportations, to removals from the country, and those can be a series of different court challenges or practical or needing returns arrangements with somebody's home country. And on that side, we're also strengthening the response. So we've increased the returns of enforced returns by over 20% since the election. That also includes a significant increase in foreign national offenders, in foreign criminals being deported and removed. So we're also strengthening those measures as well. So this is about a practical step-by-step changes that we think are the right ones to restore order, to restore respect for the rules and enforcement to the system.
But the problem of deporting sex offenders is a critical one, isn't it? And we've a couple of examples for you. So we have an example, a convicted Zimbabwean paedophile who was jailed for child sex offences for 5 years. He'd been convicted of sexual offences against children. He'd been convicted of possessing indecent images of children. He'd been convicted of distributing indecent images of children. But his deportation is stopped because he would face inhumane treatment in Zimbabwe as a gay white man who was a convicted sex offender. Because of his human rights under the ECHR, how would your changes affect that case?
So I'm not going to get into the detail of individual cases, although there are some really appalling cases
The principle of that
I
case,
have seen.
How would your change in your legislation affect the principle of that case?
Yeah. So the first step is to prevent people from being granted asylum, being granted these additional protections that come if you have refugee status. That is hugely important, and that's the first step in the system. up until now, we've not been able to do that.
So the change in this law will only affect people who from now on try and claim asylum. This change in the law is not going to change in any way anyone who is convicted here of sex offences or child sex offences. You would still have no greater powers to deport them.
So the first thing is, obviously, if people have been granted asylum, granted refugee status, then they clearly can't be deported. So the first stage is to prevent people... Even if they're
convicted of sex offences or child sex offences?
The first stage is to prevent people being granted asylum in the first place. Secondly, we're also strengthening the deportations, removals as well. And that includes strengthening the arguments that we put in the courts, because there are cases where we get legal challenges in the courts, and we need to make sure that the strongest possible arguments are put in favour of what is in about public protection, in favour of the decision that the Home Office has taken.
But can I just interrupt? Because a lot of people are criticising you this morning for saying that this is a rushed piece of legislation and it is simply political electioneering because we're in a week of local elections where you face a massive challenge from reform. And reform's policy is to get the UK out of the European Convention on Human Rights. And if you start going down the road but admit that in hugely serious cases you can still not deport people that many of your voters might think should have been chucked out years ago because of the ECHR, don't you open up the risk of people saying just get out of the ECHR?
Well, the first thing is I think it is right to strengthen the law because this is a law that we've inherited from 14 years of Conservative government and they haven't done so. Secondly, we are increasing deportations and removals within international law. Everybody's always said, oh, it's because of international law we can't increase removals and deportations. Well, we're doing it already. We've had a more than 20% increase in enforced returns since the election, simply by taking this issue seriously, simply by putting the resources in place to be able to do that and to take the action we need. So we'll continue to do that.
OK, but a final point on the ECHR, because, you know, as I say, if you're moving towards reform on issues of asylum and this kind of populist policy, and it will be popular, I'm sure, would you ever move to a place where you say it would be legitimate for the UK to come out of the European Convention on Human Rights, which would enable us then to deport pretty obnoxious criminals? Or are you absolutely committed to staying in and on balance think it's a good thing for the UK to be part of it?
Well, we abide by international law, and the reason that we do so is the international law helps us get all kinds of agreements with other countries, including return agreements. So abiding by international law helps get those return agreements in place. It also helps us with everything ranging from the Good Friday Agreement to issues around security cooperation and intelligence sharing. So there's a whole series of areas, including our strengthened cooperation with France on preventing illegal migration, where actually abiding by international law actually helps us. Within international law, we can also take action to strengthen UK law, including increasing deportations and removals. People have been using international law as an excuse, whereas actually we should be taking the action that we need.
And partly they're using it because some politicians might suggest it would be a deterrent. You, as the Home Secretary, you know, will have seen these figures that there's a record 10,000 individuals doing the illegal boat crossings across the Channel. You promised to smash the gangs. It's not having an impact so far. I'm sure you'll say, well, of course, the good weather means that more people are able to do that. But if you're just relying on the weather as a deterrent, it's not going to work, is it?
Well, you're right. We can't carry on with a situation where our border security is so heavily affected by the weather. We've got criminal gangs that have been deep-rooted for 6 years without proper challenge, who are taking advantage of the calm weather days and the increase in those calm weather days. But the crucial thing is that's why we have to go after the criminal gangs. They're operating a new tactic now where the boat is launched much further up the coast, comes down along the coast, and then migrants get into the boat, in the shallow waters. They're already in the water. Once they're in the water, the French authorities have not been intervening because that's been their rules for far too long. France has now agreed that they will change their rules, they'll change their laws, and they will start intervening in French waters in order to prevent boat crossings.
Okay.
That's crucial. We've been able to achieve that. We have got France to change their laws in a way that previous government hasn't, exactly because we have worked with them. That's how we need to prevent these dangerous crossings that are undermining our border security.
OK, and just before we let you go, catastrophic power outage yesterday in Spain and Portugal. Any concern that that could affect us in the UK, that we could face the same as we hurtle towards net zero? Some energy experts in the Telegraph this morning saying that that is part of the cause. Is that what you understand as the UK government? And do you have a grab bag? Would you advise that we all have one?
Well, Spain and Portugal obviously still investigating the cause of this outage. It is obviously had serious consequences, and we'll continue to work with them and to support them in their response to this. But we also need to make sure that we have proper resilience in place, and that is a wider security issue, but also the more that we actually have broader range of the energy supplies as part of our resilience as well. So we continue to look at that as part of our security reviews to make sure we've got that resilience in place. But it's something that all countries always need to take seriously.
OK, have you got a grab bag? Should we all have one?
I don't personally, but I think this is, we have a security review which makes sure that we look continually at what the resilience is that we need for all kinds of things that can happen. The unexpected can always happen, as we saw in the pandemic a few years ago. We never know what the global issues are that we'll face.
Yvette Cooper, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.